Hello, everybody. John Waters here again, and I'm here again with my good friend, Dr. Paul Cullen, an Irish doctor who's been based in Dublin, in Germany for many years, and he's been on with us before, talking about the general health aspects of the last few years and other matters. But today we were thinking we would talk about the actual situation, politically speaking, in the world, particularly in the wake of the American election and the implications of that, the whole drift of things globally and in Ireland and in Germany, to the extent that we can link those things in. So, hello, Dr. Paul, how are you?
Not bad, thank you, John. Very nice to speak to you again.
Yeah, it's good to be with you. And you know, I'm just noticing there that, you know, behind you, you have a very interesting photograph, which is slightly gone out of view now a little bit, but I think I recognize the tie. Yes, I do. I recognize the general visage of the President of the United States of America currently.
Yeah.
Can you give explanation for this quite extravagant display of partiality? This is in your office, I gather, is it?
This is in my office, yeah. Well, I think that the election of Donald Trump I think it's actually the culmination of a cultural shift that has been going on for a long time now. Perhaps even in the United States, I'd say it maybe started with the conservative revolution under Ronald Reagan, the moral majority, and it's been on, I would say, underway for about 20-25 years maybe. And I think that what happened was there was a cultural shift, and what we're seeing now with the election is a reaction to the cultural shift that took place first. So people think, you know, Trump is going to change the culture, and he is, but in fact he wouldn't have been able, this election would not have been possible if there hadn't been a change in groundswell opinion in the United States over the past quarter of a century. And, you know, Andrew Breitbart, who set up the very successful Breitbart news blog, he made a famous statement. He said that politics is downstream of culture. And yes, I think that's true. You know, what we see emerging in our legislation has its origins in cultural changes that took place maybe 25, 30, even longer. And the same way, the rollback now that we are seeing is a reflection of a cultural change that has been taking place for maybe 25 years. And I think in some ways it's probably better that he wasn't elected directly the second time, because I think, you know, his first period in office was chaotic. He was unprepared for it. He didn't have the people. He was sabotaged really by the let's call it the combine. So he was sabotaged. But now he has taken that period of time to create an extraordinary group of people around himself. And, you know, we're talking about Robert Kennedy Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy, this whole group of people that he has who are now actually, you know, he's actually living up to his promises. And so today, for example, he closed down USAID. He just shut it. And USAID, you know, this was ostensibly the foreign development arm of the American government, about 10,000 employees, $50 billion a year budget. And it was actually a front for the CIA, right? This is well known. This was its primary aim. And, you know, only about maybe 5 or 10% of the funds were actually going into development. The rest was going into this kind of nefarious activities all around the world. And they just shut it down overnight. So their Twitter account was, when they logged on this morning, they had a mail saying, you don't need to come into the office. This is being closed. The Twitter account was taken down. They've even started to take down their buildings abroad, taking the names off the building. It reminded me of the bank collapse. There was this bank, remember, on Stephen's screen, where they took the name off, what's the Irish Bank?
Yes.
Where there was a picture in the newspaper of them taking the name off the bank, Stephen's screen. You know, this is, and they're actually, so I think this is this is a huge disruption, and it has produced a groundswell of change. So, for example, the German government collapsed a few months ago, you know, so we're getting snap elections now, 25th of February, I think it is. Only about 2 years into their term. It's normally a 4-year term, 2 years into their term. And this is happening all over the world. So there are things now, you know, with this new impetus is working its way out all over the world. So we have a position now in Germany where we have a conservative party, the Alternative for Germany, which Elon Musk has started to promote vociferously on Twitter, and they had their party congress about 6 or 7 days ago, and Elon Musk was beamed in and actually spoke to this party meeting and encouraged them and said, you know, of course, there are problems in German history, but there are also very good things in German history, and it's okay to be proud of your heritage, and it's okay to be a German. It's not a problem, you know. And so there was a recent vote. There was a few days ago. I told you about this. There was a terrible incident in a place called Aschaffenburg, which is in Bavaria, a medium-sized town in Bavaria, where an Afghan who had actually been refused status to stay, but was let out, attacked a group of kindergarten children and killed one small child who was about 4, severely injured another child who was about, I think, 3 or 4. And there was a man passing, and he tried to stop him. And he did stop him, but he died in the effort. And this was then the reaction of the political establishment to this was to have demonstrations against right-wing extremism, because they would, of course, be exploiting this incident for their own ends, right? So there was a bit of summary, oh, this is terrible and so on, but the real problem is that the wrong people are going to exploit this for their own ends.
Yes, the notorious far right, which is
yeah. So
which basically galvanizes the entire narrative on the inside, isn't that right?
Yeah. And so now the CDU, the Christian Democrat Party, which is supposed to be nominally conservative, but has in fact been promoting the green agenda, particularly under Angela Merkel, she was in power for 16 years, and every single big decision she took has turned out to be a disaster.
Yes.
So the so-called Energiewende, so the change in the promotion of alternative energy and the closing down of all the nuclear power stations and the conventional power stations, which means that Germany now is completely dependent on imports from France and from Czechoslovakia, from Poland, to keep the lights on, right?
Yeah.
And so this has put up the cost of power. So Germany, Germany has few natural resources, and it's not a very big country in terms of the number of people living here. So Germany is completely dependent on its industrial base and on the ingenuity of its people. That's its natural resource.
What is the situation in Germany? Because we've been hearing a lot in the last 3 years now, since the Ukraine war broke out.
Yeah.
In conflict, whatever we call it, and that the sanctions really, which seem to be on their face, really ridiculous, because they did more damage to
yes.
Europe, and in Germany, I think in particular, than they did to Russia by far. Now, what is we hear different sort of lines about Germany, that it is deindustrialized, and that it is, its economy is in serious danger, that it's in a very extremely volatile state of potential social chaos and so on. What is the mood in Germany, or what is the general feeling of the people in Germany about what's going on?
Well, what you're saying is true. I mean, the German economy hasn't grown, has been in recession essentially for 3 years. And all of the problems that we have, so we have undocumented immigration, millions of people. We don't know exactly how many. A lot of these people, it's not their fault, but they're very difficult. It's proved very difficult to integrate them. I have tried here to to employ doctors from Syria on one occasion and from North Africa on another occasion. And in both cases, we weren't able to keep them, not because we didn't want to, but because their medical education was so deficient. It would have been it would have been irresponsible to keep them. And I'm also I work in a committee for the Chamber of Physicians, and when people who have foreign qualifications in my particular specialty, which is laboratory medicine, apply for a license to work here, I get the files with other people and I go through them, and we're trying to do our best to help people work here. But in most cases we find that the qualifications, it's very hard to verify them. And when you go into it in any detail, you find that the medical education is just not suitable compared, for example, to people from Eastern Europe, from Russia, from Poland, from Czech Republic, anything like that. It's just a different. And the rest. A lot of the people are coming here are of course much less qualified, and it's very, very difficult to integrate them. And so the big problem is it's not even acknowledging this. The establishment just doesn't want to acknowledge this problem, or rather are forcing this problem. And I think it's an almost an attempt to destabilize German society. And you've written a lot about this in Ireland. It's exactly the same things that you are seeing in Ireland, we are seeing here. It's exactly the same playbook. It's exactly the same arguments, exactly the same. It's just a bigger country. And I think the German, of course, the German infrastructure and so on was of a very high level. So there's an enormous mass that has to be. We're living now. Let's say we're kind of burning the furniture now at this stage, but there's a lot of furniture, right? So this is going to go on for a while. And if I think if we had the proper economic policies, and if we had a stable energy supply and predictable politics, and if we had a more free market economy and so on, I think the German economy would rebound, because the people are still here, the ingenuity is still here, the know-how is still here. But if things keep going the way they are, this country it could really go into strong economic decline.
And what is the mentality of the people, the indigenous German people, in the sense that in Ireland we pick up all of these kind of psychic undertones. I call it like mutism and lockjaw. Whereby people actually give voice to opinions which they don't really hold in their hearts. Yeah. In the face of all of these radical changes and without consultation, and the whole face of their countryside and their cities being changed over almost in a matter of months. Yes. And for Germany, it's been a somewhat longer story. They've had mass inward migration for a long time, going back many years. But at the same time, since Angela Merkel's in 2015 or 16?
2015, yeah.
6 million people have come in the interim. That's a lot of people in any country. How are people reacting to this? Because we have heard many stories as well about sexual assaults and the usual stuff, which seem to be very prevalent in
Yeah. Well, I mean, there has been, of course, people say these knife attacks, particularly we've seen a lot of knife attacks, and not every knife attack, not every migrant, is responsible for knife attacks. But very few of these knife attacks have originated from Germans, right? And so there was a man, he was on a blog recently. He represents, his daughter was killed, and he represents 500 parents, right, or 500 families who have had such cases. But what happens is that these people have no face. So we never learn the names of the victims. We never see their faces. even the names of the perpetrators, you would just get their first name, I don't know, Abdul A or whatever, right? But you would never get the full name. So
Berlin, did they do that one? A Berlin man.
Yes, yeah. Well, a young man, or yes, the same thing. So and they would say, well, they use all of these tricks, and so the problem, of course, in Germany is Germany has, of course, a difficult history. There's no getting away from that. But this is a long time ago, and what I see happening is that each country has a difficult part of its history. So in the United States, it's slavery. In Britain, it's colonialism. In Germany, it's of course the Nazi period. In Ireland, it would maybe be the Catholic, the kind of the excessive rule of the Catholic Church or whatever. So in each country, what happens is they go into each country and look for the pressure point, which each country has, some with more or less justification, and you just keep pressing on this pressure point the whole time.
Yes.
And, yeah.
Sorry, and it seems to me that there's a very interesting kind of involution in all of this, Paul, in terms of the psychic conditions in Germany. I mean, because they say, well, a lot of this comes from guilt, historical guilt, because of the Nazi period and so on, that they need to overcompensate. But there was a really interesting article in First Things a few years ago, which is stuck in my mind by a German writer whose name slips my mind at the moment. But the title of it was more or less said exactly what you need to understand. And the title was The Vanity of Guilt. Yeah. And what he was talking about was the German establishment, who, by way of in demonstrating their distance from the Nazi period, by demonstrating their open, that they're basically prepared almost to give the country away. And that seems to have been almost like the headline now for the whole of Europe, that we must follow Germany's determination to expunge its past. Expunging a past that the rest of us don't actually have.
Well, it's the guilt Olympics,
Yes.
So we're in this I am more guilty than you. Oh, no, you're not. I'm more guilty. And of course, it's completely bogus, right? Because we have a very interesting situation at the moment. I have to tell you, just the last 2 days that happened, or 3 days, as a result of this murder in Aschaffenburg, the Christian Democrats kind of found their mojo for about 10 minutes and introduced a law into Parliament to reduce immigration. And up till now, they had said they would never introduce a law where they would, get support from the wrong side. So at the moment, I think about 12% of the seats of the Parliament are Alternative for Germany, and they said we're not going to introduce anything where the Alternative for Germany would support us. So they dropped this and they introduced this. It wasn't actually a law; it was a kind of an intention to act, and this was supported by the Christian Democrats, by the Free Democrats, the FDP, kind of the Liberal Party, and the Alternative for Germany, and the new it actually won by a margin of two seats, I think 305 to 303 or something like that. So it just scraped through, and of course then there was a huge uproar in the media. This was a taboo had been broken. This was the end of freedom and democracy and so on. So the next thing that happened was there were all of these demonstrations. Then I call it astroturf. It's supposed to be grassroots, but it's actually being organized by the unions, by the trade unions, by the NGOs, by the churches, who it used to be just the Protestant church, but also the Catholic Church now are getting in on the act. So they have this kind of rented demonstration. And they can you have to give it them. They're not bad at mobilizing. So they got about 100,000 people in Berlin and in other cities. So the funny thing was, it used to be, they would have a thing like, hate is not an argument. And then the next thing they'd project would be Berlin hates the AfD, right? Without so hate's not an argument, but we hate the AFD, and now they've started to hate the Christian Democrats, right? And they say they've been calling for the AFD to be banned for about 2 years now, and now they say, well, we need to ban the CDU, right? But the CDU and the AFD in polls together make up about over 60% of the electorate. So if there were an election tomorrow, they get about 60% of the seats, right?
But Paul, I want you to drill into this a little bit, because I'm interested in it, because it's so similar to what happens in Ireland. Now, the thought once this stuff when this started in Ireland first a few years ago, suddenly there would be this basically psychological operation that would follow some outrage or atrocity or whatever, a murder or double murders, we've had a few of those as well. And suddenly the entire, this absolute, miracle of activity would be unleashed, as though, like, literally, not just overnight, almost instantly.
Yes.
Demonstrations, women on the streets with candles and framed photographs of the deceased, and so on and so on, statues and so on. And it's the thing that was in my mind watching this always, and this being Ireland, was this: there's no earthly way that any native entity, organization, or group would be capable of organizing this at this level of efficiency. Now, of course, Germany is historically a much more efficient country than Ireland. It's a pretty, that's what it's known for above all other things, perhaps in the positive context. But do you have the sense at all that this is being orchestrated from outside, or from some centralized operation that is actually imposing the same policies across Europe, across America, and is actually dealing in each country with each event in pretty much the same way?
Yes and no. Yes, it is being organized by the same group that's organizing it in Germany, okay?
Yes.
And in Ireland, rather. It's been organized by the same people, but Germany, of course, is a much more central position in Europe than Ireland does. So Ireland is a small country with 5 million people. So Ireland gets its marching orders from Brussels, but the German elite are part of this central nexus that are controlling this in all of Europe.
Yes.
So, and there's a big transatlantic option. So Germany is an occupied country still. I mean, there are huge American military bases here, particularly in Ramstein.
That's what I'm thinking of, really, Paul, when I asked that question, because it seems to me that the fingerprints of the Americans, the deep state, would express perhaps very much through the Democratic Party apparatus, that's kind of public face of, insofar as you ever see one. It's Democratic Party that seem to be the main actors in driving this, and people who have associations with the Democratic Party and connections with the Clintons and so on, and very tenacious groups, shall we say. It's amazing to me, that this is the orchestration of this. And you mentioned earlier about the media and the way that they now, you don't get to see any picture or very much coverage of the victims of these things. That's a complete inversion of the entire kind of history of journalism up to the point of maybe a few years ago. I can't put an exact point on it, but it's no more than maybe, well, probably go back to the middle of the last decade, after the influx that Merkel sanctioned. The whole thing seemed to flip. Because in the old days, there was this kind of idea of, which was somewhat vulgar and so on in many respects, and ghoulish, but it was like that idea of the color story, the story of the person who died, and the fight to be the first with a photograph, and all of that, among the somewhat, sordid in its own way, but nevertheless a very important part of informing the public in full as to the nature, and reassuring the public as to the details, that these details became ingrained. Now we don't ever see the victims, as you say. We don't even know where they are. There's no interviews with their neighbors or friends or relations anymore. And of course, the perpetrators are, in Ireland, they're always this guy, Tipperary man, Abdul, Abdul O'Mahony, or something, some nonsense.
Two young men.
Yeah, and they're actually making up names now for these in order to mislead people. Now, this is a really, really disgusting situation, isn't it? That you know, our democracies, which depend on media, on press, above all else, for the functioning of democracy, that this is what we've come to. And yet they're berating people and accusing people of all kinds of crimes, when in fact, the only criminals in sight are these journalists.
Well, you know, you mentioned Angela Merkel. Angela Merkel, I mean, there is, I've been living in this country now for about 30 years. And I have to say, I was in England for about 3 years. And, you know, I never, in all the time I was here, had even the slightest feeling of being discriminated against in the same way as I felt that in England. You know, where I was working in England, it was obvious to me that there was a kind of a glass ceiling. I don't know the way things are now, but that was in the 80s. And it was just difficult, you know, as an Irish person, even as a doctor, you could feel it, right? And I never, for all the time I was here, there was the language barrier to get through. But once you got through that, and once you were prepared to kind of, you know, I don't know, just do your bit, work, whatever, I never had the impression. I mean, I had problems, but I had the same problems everybody had, and I never had that impression. So, and also, you know, running a business here now, which I've been doing for about 20 years, or you know, the people here, I work well with them. You know, I like it here. My children are here. So you know, when I read your column every week, and you know, I always think a lot of what you're describing is just the same here. It's just a different, just, you know, in a different context, but exactly the same mechanisms. And if you go back to Angela Merkel, you were talking about the Americans, but Angela Merkel is actually, she grew up in East Germany, okay? Mm. She has a very interesting background. Her father was called the Rote Kästner, the Red Kästner. He was a Protestant minister who, in the before Angela Merkel was born, after the Berlin Wall was built, went from Hamburg to Eastern Germany. So he went from west to east for ideological reasons, right? And yes. So he even though he was a Protestant minister in an atheistic country, when they were growing up, I remember reading a biography of Angela Merkel. They had 2 cars at a time when we didn't even have one, right? Yeah. Growing up. And then we got a jalopy, an A35. I remember reading your book, Bring Back the Old Roads. And it's the same kind of a thing, you know, where we'd have the bits of the car in the kitchen. And I remember, you know, we used to call him, he'd be with this thing trying to put it together, you know, exactly the same, right? Yeah. And here she was in East Germany with a chauffeur, right? And going to private schools and so on. So she was what was called cadre. So a cadre, right? So she had this specialized a communist upbringing, and she won a prize for speaking Russian in East Germany, and she was actually, you know, sent to Moscow. So she was trained in Moscow, and at the university. So even though her father was a minister, she was allowed to study, which was almost unheard of. Because if your parents had particular occupations, you weren't allowed to go to university. And she then did chemistry, and she was allowed to travel to the West to do part of her doctorate in the West. And she was also in the university the head of propaganda. And she said, oh, you know, the only thing we were, you know, if foreign delegations came, I got them theater tickets. No, she was part agitprop, right? So agitation and propaganda. She was head of that department in the university. And then miraculously, after the Berlin Wall came down, she wasn't even in the CDU, but suddenly, by magic, she was a prominent member of the CDU, and Helmut Kohl adopted her almost like his daughter. He called her my kleines Mädchen, my little girl, right? And yes, completely underestimated, because about a few years later she kind of got rid of him. Okay, she then became, she was environmental minister, and she had this kind of, you'd almost say, a piss pot haircut, right, and all this, and everybody thought, oh, she was so, and she was behind the scenes the whole time, you know, working on this agenda to destroy Germany. Right. and just a few days ago, I told you about this vote in the Bundestag about three or 4 days ago. After the Christian Democrats won this vote narrowly, Merkel came out of retirement to attack the candidate for chancellor, Winfried Merz, who's the chancellor candidate for that party. So she attacked the chancellor candidate of her own party, and she said this is unheard of, going in with the AfD and so on. So she was recorded a few months ago, and she said, well, if Merz gets above himself, all I need to do is press 2 or 3 buttons, and that'll get rid of him. Okay, it hasn't actually worked like that. So
yeah,
it almost goes deeper than this American influence. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. So what do you think that is? I mean, have you any sense, Paul, about what is the overarching structure that is pulling where the puppet masters are crouched, manipulating all these people?
Well, I don't want to get kind of too conspiratorial, because I don't know, but for example, after the Russian Revolution essentially failed with 1917. So it essentially failed by 1921 because it just didn't work economically. And then Lenin had to introduce this what's called the new economic program. So he had to introduce a certain measure of free enterprise to rescue the revolution. And at that time, the Americans actually supported Stalin and they supported Lenin, right? So the Americans were supporting the Russians during this period of time. And of course, then during the Second World War, they, a lot of the materiel that Stalin had came from America. They had Ford trucks and all of this, and at the same time, Hitler, when he was built up, was also being funded by the Americans. So for example, the whole eugenics program was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. So the eugenics program at the Robert Koch Institute in Germany, that was funded by America. And the eugenics, of course, was an idea that came out of England and then went to the United States. And in the 30s, eugenics was the same as climate change. It was, settled science and all the rest of it. It never really got hold in England, but then it got hold in America, but they couldn't kind of get it to go the way they really wanted in America. So they said, oh, the Germans, they're the lads, they'll implement it, which they did. So they funded it so they funded the German scientists had very close links with the United States, and a lot of the funding came from the United States to fund these eugenics programs, which then, of course, went, as we know, in the Second World War, just terrible, right? So this kind of picture that we've been fed for years of this antagonism between East and West, which undoubtedly existed at a deeper level, didn't exist to the same extent that it existed on the surface, And so I think this idea of, what we're talking about is a concerted attempt to bring down Western civilization by hook or by crook, right? And so so Merkel was approaching it. She was brought up in the communist system, and she managed to hijack the Christian Democrats, and had it in a vice almost all the time she was in power. So anybody, it's very difficult. It means that the party is, of course, to a certain extent wrecked at this stage. But she came from the East, and what we're seeing now is these influences, which I agree with you, are coming from the West, but it's the same set of influences.
Yes. Well, I'd like to go into that a bit more when we go back to the United States in a little while. But there's one issue about Germany that I wanted to raise with you, Paul, because this was quite a surprise to me. Because, we have a certain image of the Germans in Ireland and in some parts of Europe, Southern Europe and so on, but that they're, very mechanistic and arrogant and so on and so forth. And you know, and that's, in a certain sense, that's the official face of Germany can be like that, sort of, you know, dictatorial and you know, unyielding. And I remember back after in about 2010 or so, 9 or 10, I was in Cologne giving a talk, and to a general audience, and I was kind of determined there to go over and like basically stick it to them, you know, let them know that we had been screwed over by, you know, it was be later actually 2010, probably after the Troika was here, so it'll be 11, and let them know how hard done by, you know, the Irish had been, and so on and so forth. And I was expecting a row, you know, but what I got from the audience like was complete support and a degree of incomprehension that this could have happened. You know, it was utterly different from the official face of Germany we were hearing about or seeing and listening to in general in these matters. Is that something that has any?
No. I mean, at the moment, you know, I travel a lot on the train, and you know, the German infrastructure is crumbling. So the trains no longer run on time. Often the trains don't work. The number of flights is decreasing. The road network is the bridges particularly are beginning to fall apart. A few months ago in Dresden, a bridge fell into the Elbe just because it hadn't been maintained. And so you know, it's crumbling. And when I'm on the train, you often see pensioners going through the train, and they have these little kind of lights, like miners' lights, you know, you can buy the light, and they're going around and looking in the rubbish bins to collect plastic bottles because you get 25 cents on the bottle, right? Yeah. And these are people who have, you know, you can see it. They're just ordinary people who've worked their whole lives. So the you know, the average German pension is about 900 euros. That's all. And so Germans also, the average wealth of Germans is much less than the wealth of the Irish, because they don't tend to own their own houses. So most people in Ireland would, you know, would own their own house, or a lot of people would. I think probably the majority. In Germany, there's less than 40%, right? So you know, there's this image, and it's a powerhouse and so on. But in actual fact, the gross national product per head in Ireland is 1.5 times that of Germany now. So yeah. And when I came here, it was, you know, the other way around.
Yes.
So and the Germans are, you know, they're one of the biggest net contributors to the EU. They put a huge amount of money into the war in the Ukraine, and they still are sending foreign aid to China. They spent 60 million euros last year on bicycle paths in Peru. Right, so you have this completely ideological takeover, and because of this national complex and national bad conscience, of course, they've allowed themselves to be hijacked by a group of well, it's, you know, left wing green, but it's this green left wing woke agenda. It would be, you know, perfectly at home in let's say Washington D.C. or San Francisco, or lots of parts of Ireland and so on.
Yes, but it seems to me, Paul, that again, you see this all over the place, different kinds of brands or colors of leftism, and in this battle, or whatever you would call it. And yet there's this sense that actually it's not about that, really, that this is, if you like, a software. These are softwares which are used to propel the machine while it is in operation. But ultimately, where this seems to be leading us to is some kind, or where the plan is, or has been, is to lead us into some kind of neo-feudalist reality.
Yes.
Which, you know, which is, I don't know what it is, but it's not communism, or it's not.
Well, I call it techno-feudalism. Techno-feudalism. And I was a bit annoyed because I saw that Yanis Varoufakis had used the same word, but I didn't get it from him. No, but I think it's I think, you know, I think what it is a kind of technocracy. So there's a technocratic element to it, and a neo-feudalist element. So I call it techno-feudalism. So the idea is we're going to have, you know, a society which is not going to be pyramidal in shape, but it's just going to be a surface with a dot on top, right? So the dot is maybe the 1% or 0.1% of very wealthy people, and the
Yeah.
rest the same. You know, almost like even about you know, feudalism and the Middle Ages has a kind of a bad name, because if you actually go into the history of the Middle Ages, it wasn't as bad in many respects as it is now, because you know, the landowner had rights, but he also had responsibilities, and it was a much poorer society overall. And if you visit a medieval castle, the lads didn't have it, you know, there was no heating, no windows, you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, and nobody. I remember I went to a thing, and they had a, you know, life in the 17th century or 16th century in the countryside in Germany. So there was a kind of a shed, you know, like a cottage, and the only piece of furniture in this was a little rack on the wall, a little wooden rack, and this was where you would put your spoon, right? Hang up your spoon. So the only thing anybody ever had was a bowl and a spoon. And there's a phrase in Germany, when you die, if somebody dies, they said they gave up their spoon, right? And that was from that time, because when you died, the next person actually inherited your spoon, because it was you know, like Miles Nagopoline with the bottle, where you know, he breaks the bottle because it was spoiling the effect of absolute poverty. You know, do you know that story? Where the guy learning the Irish, and the lads come up with a recording device to record the Irish, and the guy is in he's in his hovel with the bottle, and they give him a bottle of whiskey to get him to speak the Irish, and to get him drunk, because when he's drunk, he speaks, nobody can understand it, right? So these two academics from Dublin are of the opinion this must be the purest Irish of all, because it's completely unintelligible. So when they're finished interrogating him, and they have it all on they're recording it on this, you know, wax thing, and they're leaving, and one of the professors then takes the bottle, the whiskey bottle, and breaks it, right? Because it was spoiling the effect of pure poverty, because there had been nothing in the bottle before they came. But this was the same in Germany, you know. So the kind of feudalism, to get back to that we have now, is you know, we have whereas in those days there was all, you know, nobody had anything. It was very difficult to organize society. Now we have a world where there's an excess of everything, right? So
Yes.
so you know, if they're up to about the 70s, I think we've discussed this before, if there was starvation in the world, sometimes you just could do nothing about it, because the harvest had failed and you had no means of reaching the starving people. If somebody is starving in the world now, it's a political decision.
Yes.
Somebody wants them to starve. And so you know, this kind of, there's no need, in the same way as there was an absolute lack of resources in the Middle Ages. And the Middle Ages, you know, there was great flowering in the Middle Ages. They built the cathedrals and so on. So we have to be a bit more circumspect even about the Dark Ages. They aren't that dark, right? But what we have now is much more sinister, because A, there's no need for it. And secondly, because of the technological means at our disposal, the idea is there are just too many people, right? There's too many people. We just got to get rid of them. We don't, and you know, the small group reckon the idea, I think, is to have a kind of a society where you have a small group at the top, and then you have a kind of I call it a feeder layer. So this would be a layer, maybe you need, you know, protection. So you need police, military, you need maybe, you know, agricultural production, you need a certain amount of industrial production, and you need maybe a certain amount of entertainment. But that's it. The rest is kind of surplus to requirements.
Well, this is the moment where we've arrived at, Paul, and it's very, very sinister indeed. Because, you know, one of the things you would have to say, I mean, your colleague Michel Esfeld has written about this idea that, you know, the reason that we had Western democracy and Western freedom and Western constitutional republics was really by way of contradistinction with Soviet Russia. In other words, that they were the big bad totalitarian tyrants, and we were the liberated, free, emancipated peoples, and so on. And we who grew up in that culture, all of us, thought this is reality, this is the future, we're the cutting edge of modernity here, and our job or our mission is to inspire the rest of the world to become like us. Isn't that the thing? But then what Esfield writes, and it's really chilling idea, but I think he's right, was that this was only a scam in order to basically, create at this moment this sense of contradistinction, and that as soon as the Berlin Wall came down, that started to unravel, and deliberately was unraveled in a sense. And that here we are now on the cusp of what is the second factor, I think, which is that AI is going to provide the opportunity that wasn't there previously for a kind of a bloodless tyranny. That in a sense, it will be tyranny without force, activated invisibly and remotely by social credit controls and prohibitions and sanctions and penalties being imposed remotely, and your money cut off, your freedom, your doors are locked perhaps, in your apartment for the weekend, whatever. And this thing is so fantastical that, I think we haven't even gone near it by way of having a discourse about it in our societies. In to the fact that, of course, the Silicon Valley hijacked the whole issue and took it away in a basket about 30 years ago and started to work on it. And then when they had all their ducks in a row, they came back out and said, right, sorted. We now know what the future is going to be like, and you'll be delighted to hear it. You'll be very happy, and we'll be even happier. And that seems to be the I just read a very interesting book. Now, this will kind of scare you a bit because people don't like this guy's name, but it's by Yuval Noah Harari, and it's his latest book called Nexus, and it's about it's very interesting, Paul, because there's two things that I have to say about it. One is this guy is obviously very biased. I mean, he's woke, he's World Economic Forum. He's all the bad things you could possibly. He's anti-Trump and all those things, anti-populist. And of course, he twists the facts about populism. He says that populism tries to suggest that power is the only thing that matters. And he also tries to suggest that populists really are about destroying the idea of absolute truth, which is direct inverse of the truth. To start with. In fact, that's what the woke people, that's what the postmodernists do, that's what the culture Marxists do. But the point is that in the sections which are about AI, the book is about information going back from the Stone Age to AI, and it's fascinating, those sections, because he's very honest, I think, about it, insofar as I can tell, because I've read a lot of academic papers and other stuff about AI, and I mean, he's telling me stuff I hadn't come across. And it's really, really interesting. But one of the things that strikes me is he tries to justify the whole idea that only the private sector could have developed this. Now, that may be true, but the question is, morally, ought not our governments at a much earlier stage intervened to ask the kind of questions that are only surfacing now about this? Because, as you say, like, one of the things that comes across in the book, and it's really staggering, I'm slightly extrapolating from what he says because he doesn't even reveal the full enormity of it. But we're here now, Paul, and we're talking in two different countries to each other, right? And we're in rooms where there are various maybe electronic devices, where every single thing that happens in that room is recorded, perhaps, maybe on 5 or 6 different devices in different microphones and different. We have no earthly idea where that's going to. Now, going back in the spirit of that kind of sense of emancipation and freedom that we had through the 60s and the 70s and all that, we take it for granted. Well, of course, it's perfectly safe because, we live in a democracy and it's going to be perfectly fine. Nobody's going to kind of, I mean, imagine if you told a risque joke to one of your patients, and that's there. And some nefarious actor in the future wants to get at you, wants to take you down from some elevated position or whatever. Any of us, I'm not talking about you, Paul, but any of us. All those things. Think of all the things that people say indiscreetly to their wives, their husbands, their brothers, their sisters, their children, in their own privacy as their own. All that will be blackmail bait in the future. And in the future, anybody who poses a threat to what I call the combine will be subject to every single word they spoke, perhaps, in the entirety of their lives, certainly from the point of, say, the beginning of the third millennium, when all of this technology was unrolled. So this is enormous, and yet there's no discussion of it. And it's not just we're entering a new world, we're entering a totally new universe here.
Well, I think that's right, and I deliberately don't make any effort to use, mail encryptation or to encrypt anything. I give everybody my mobile phone number, because I work off the assumption that I'm not as well known in that sense, but I am I would say a person of interest here in Germany. So I work off the assumption that they record everything I say,
Yeah.
And
yeah,
but I have decided I don't care what they say. And what we're seeing is that the magic potion isn't working anymore. So this is why I have the picture of Donald Trump here, because I've made a conscious decision not to care. I was going to say a bad word there. Not to care about what they say about me, because they're going to say it anyway, and they're going to say it whether you do it or not. They're going to make up something. And, even if they can find nothing, they're going to make something up because the media are now just constructed reality. It's got nothing to do, or, it has a very tenuous connection with reality. It's at most incomplete, often completely wrong, and so on. So, but it's not working. So if you take Donald Trump, all of this, they tried every single thing. They tried to impeach him. They tried to charge him. The entire media apparatus was against him, all of Hollywood, all of the stars. For example, yesterday or the day before, there were the Golden Globes or whatever. Nobody gives a shit about the Golden Globes anymore. Well, maybe if somebody makes a movie or a film, they might think, okay, but nobody really cares anymore what Scarlett Johansson thinks about anything.
Yes.
And so in a sense, I think we have to live with this new technology, because it's not going to go away. And total surveillance, we may have to it's very new. So at some stage we're going to have to regulate it. But I think the best antidote to it is just to ignore it, and to ignore what people say about you, and to ignore what because they're going to say it anyway. And
but I think though what we're going to get, the kind of the nexus that we're going to be drawn into is really a very dark place for everybody, because they will have total knowledge of you in every way. They will have basically as much knowledge or more as if you're living in a glass box.
Yes.
And they're overlooking it all the time. That's pretty much what it would be like.
But it's this kind of panopticon, like this. I don't know who came up with that. Was it Hume? This idea of the prison where you could see everybody, all the time. Yeah.
Yes, and one of the other things that really fascinated me about the book was there's lots of very interesting stuff. I really would, even though I have as much bias against Noah Harari as he has against Mr. Trump, I would have to say it's well worth reading this book, because there's so much information in it about how these things are going to work. For example, one of the things is about how, if you're, for example, applying for a bank loan, and the kinds of criteria that will be applied by an algorithm as opposed to what would be applied by a bank manager. And it may well be that they will, he goes through certain things that, for example, the fact that you made your application on an iPhone, it will have meaning in terms of the points that you might get for that. You will get probably plus points for that at the moment, maybe not always. But equally, the fact was that he said, that you're the kind of person who would allow your battery of your phone to run down to 17%, will be a factor, in which will be a minus factor in their assessment of your character. Now, that's the kind of criteria. And then, like, he goes through then the protestations which you might raise about this. So, well, look at my bank account, and you'll see that I only overdrew my account twice in the last 10 years. Yes, oh yes, you got 300 points for that, but the minus 37 for this and 33 for this, and they cancelled all that out. So you know what I mean? That we're entering into an era in which the logic will not be human at all.
Well, I'm not actually that pessimistic, John, to be honest with you, because I think, for example, AI cuts both ways.
Yes.
Right? So you know, I've often thought there are a lot of things that are you know, are coded in a way now that to make them deliberately difficult to understand. For example, the Maastricht agreement. You know, I think it's like 3 meters thick of paper, something like that.
Yeah. Yes.
And it's written in such a way that you can't actually read it. So it's written in this, you know, paragraph, this, that, and the next thing. It's like, you know, the way mobile phone contracts are made, so you can't compare them one to the other. And a lot of insurance contracts are written like that, so you can't understand them. So when your house burns down, you find you aren't actually insured for that particular thing, right?
Now, well, that's, isn't it? Insurance, I think, of all kinds of the rule is that you're insured for absolutely everything except whatever's happened to you.
Yeah, exactly. But the same. So we can use we can now. You know, I've often thought if I had you know a week and I was bored, what I would do is put all these European contracts through an AI, and then I would ask the AI to show me inconsistencies, because it's going to be inconsistent, and then find inconsistencies and start, you know, suing the authorities for these where I know it's inconsistent, but they don't know it's inconsistent. So it can go in both, you know, this AI can go in both directions, and we have it now. And I think, you know, the other thing is that we are many and they are few. You know, there are a lot more of us than there are of them. And, you know, human, I think, you know, you cannot wipe out human nature.
Well,
so,
yeah,
in the Soviet, yeah. Sorry.
No,
well,
no.
In the Soviet Union, you know, there were enormous attempts to create the new Soviet man, he was called, and you know, in the end, it didn't work. And you know, if you look at say Russia now, there are in many ways in which Russia is in many ways a more attractive place to live than here. You know, so I mean, Russia has its own drawbacks, but I think, you know, I think the human spirit is inconquerable.
Well, okay, well, that's a good, very interesting point, though. I mean, given what we've observed in the last 5 years in the Western countries in particular, where, you know, there doesn't seem to be much fight in the average Westerner at this point. I mean, you know, and to think of it in terms of tyranny and so on, and, you know, Orwell on the one hand, Huxley on the other, 1984, Brave New World. Now, I think 1984 is an extraordinarily good book. I think Brave New World is an extraordinarily bad book, but nevertheless, they do function as very good kind of poles in this question, in this axis of questioning about, because it does seem to be that we're moving towards, or being moved towards, a version of tyranny which will be much closer to the Brave New World, the Huxley one, the Orwellian one. And that kind of suggests that you can actually lull people, you know, you can kind of stupefy people into a sense of complacency and indifference to their lives, so long as they have their creature comforts, or what they think are their creature comforts. And that, you know, we can see this, the early signs of this in all kinds of ways. You would see this too in your profession, I'm sure. The obesity epidemic that we have now in all our countries, you know, where people are now, as where they're more focused on satisfying their instincts than they are of satisfying their spirits, as it were. Isn't that true?
Well, I think, you know, I think COVID will turn out to have been a mistake, because I think they overplayed their hand with the COVID number. And I think, you know, what happened was, if you take a country like Germany, you know, where all of this kind of pressure that the German society, and it can, you know, muster when it's concentrated, you can imagine, right, how organized they are. And yet 15% of people refused to take the vaccine, right? Now that resistance, you've often written about this, is is beginning to break apart in some respects. But nevertheless, you know, despite enormous pressure, the likes of which we have never seen. I don't think we've ever seen it. I don't think even, you know, in the Soviet Union it was as pervasive and as hard, you know, as that. And I often think, you know, down in hell, right? So there's a little table, and there's Hitler and Pol Pot and Stalin, and they're sitting around the table, and you know, all the things, the atrocities they did, and so on. And then Fauci comes along, and he says, "Ah, lads, you didn't need to go to all that trouble." Because, you know, the psychological mechanisms, you know, what we forget is, of course, the let's call it the industrial military complex has been working on psychological manipulation for, you know, at least the last 100 years, probably longer, you know, since Bernays and so on. And they've been putting the same amount of effort and the same amount of resources into it as they have been into normal development of nuclear bombs. I mean, we forget that. But the same amount, you know, the same amount of people as well, they just don't talk about it. So they had all this ready to go. There were at least, let's say, 50 tabletop exercises that we know about, culminating in this event 201. And they had the nudging unit in Britain and all of this, you know, flatten the curve, all of this stuff, right? And so they unleashed psychological warfare, which they had been developing, you know, for a hostile a situation for at least 100 years on their own people with maximum intensity.
Yes,
maximum intensity and still only 85% complied. Now, if you look at the population, you know, the population is let's say distributed like a bell curve. Okay, so let's say there's 15% on this side, and then there's 15% on the other side who are working in the opposite direction, and the remainder 70% in the middle will go whatever way the wind blows, essentially.
yes.
So 15% is actually not a bad figure. You know, a lot of research shows to turn a society, you need to convince about 8%, 9%, and if this group 8% to 9% is determined enough, they can turn the society. So I you know, I think this technology, every piece of technology that has been developed, you know, has its advantages and its drawbacks. But I'm fundamentally an optimist in that I think, you know, the general trajectory of human development is extremely positive. And if you take just one measure of human development, which is, let's say, life expectancy, okay? You know, life expectancy, everything goes into life expectancy to this one number. And life expectancy worldwide today is about 76. You know, life expectancy in Ireland didn't reach 76 until the 80s, I would say. You know, so if you had a figure, you know, for well-being, you could say, just painting with a very broad brush, you could say the entire world is, in terms of its quality of life, at about where Ireland was, where Dublin was in 1976. Now, in 1976, you were driving around the country and so on. So, you know, so this is a huge, life expectancy has doubled almost since the Second World War.
Yes.
And you know, what I was saying, that the problem is we've been hoodwinked. We have such you know, such powerful technologies. We have access to almost unlimited clean energy, which is the key to everything, right? Really, we have way. For example, just one thing is, there's a way of burning waste, which is called it's called a plasma torch, right? So you create an electric arc, and under exclusion of oxygen, and it enables you to burn any waste, break it down to its molecular components. So what you're left with is carbon monoxide and hydrogen gas, and then the elements. So you can actually recover. You can recover cobalt. You can recover iron. You can recover. So there is a solution. You know, we have technical solutions to most of the problems we have. It's just these people that are doing all this to us, they have no interest in following the solutions. And one thing that occupies me that maybe we could talk about is, you know, why do these toxic ideas, you know, if you take, for example, in the presidential race, that guy, what's his name, who was mayor of New York, the little fella, the guy who had been mayor of New York.
Yes,
he was a millionaire. What's his name?
Oh, this is back in 2020.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, he put billions into his campaign, and Elizabeth Warren just executed him in you know, with one question. And so the thing is, it's not a question of resources. It's, you need the resources, you need the effort, but there has to be a fertile soil.
Bloomberg.
Yeah. So Bloomberg got nowhere despite his millions, and despite having, you know, the media. He has his own media empire and so on, but he got nowhere.
Yeah.
So he got no traction. So the question is, why are these toxic ideas, and this is something that particularly in Germany, this kind of this climate stuff, right? Which there is about the same amount of scientific basis to it as there was to the COVID thing, right? You know, there's a small little grain of truth at some level. But why are these toxic ideas gaining such purchase in our societies?
Well, you see, that's the thing, Paul, that it seems to me that these are literally software programs which are baited towards young people in particular. And they're working through the colleges, to the academic world, and through the media, of course, as well, as a consequence of that. And therefore, that they are purporting to be the spontaneous eruptions of human needs and desires and wishes, when in fact they're completely imposed. And we saw that with the LGBT revolution, and particularly the continuation of that with the appalling trans movement. You see it in the climate change thing. You know, there's lots of these things where you can see where you know, that once you can attach this ideology to a particular sector of the population, and usually it is the young people, they become absolutely like evangelistic about pushing it, and of seeing it as being a kind of a, you know, a vengeance or a victory or a vindication over the reactionaries of the past. You know, it's like that line of Robert Bly's about, you know, the young people, you know, pummeling the chests of their fathers and calling them fascists. You know, that's in his book, what was it called? The Sibling Society, written 25 years ago, 30 years ago now probably. Extraordinary prophetic book about the idea that you would have the destruction of vertical culture. In other words, the culture handed down, and this eruption of horizontal culture, which is essentially culture between very narrow bands of age. You know, people like children, teenagers will only know their peers and the things their peers are interested in, and will have no sense. And that, you can feel that now, you can hear that, you can detect that. And when you meet young people now, they're at a loss very often, unless they're highly educated in very sort of eccentric colleges or something. They don't really know much about much. And so, you know, I think this is, but I wanted to ask you a question just on something you mentioned there about the kind of the life expectancy, and just by way of clarify, about just to kind of expand on that a bit, because this is just a personal question, because I pick this up sometimes, that it is said that yes, the life expectancy increasing, but there is no commensurate increase in health. You know, so that as a result, what you're actually having is people who are living longer, but in various states of ill health and illness and so on. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is the fact that, you know, if you look at technology and think about technological things, like, I look at America. America is a nightmare of over medication, which is causing much of the ill health and much of the illness and much of the death. Deaths that are happening, you know, in the premature deaths that are happening in the United States. What do you think of all that? I mean, as a doctor, you must have a close enough ringside seat on that dinner.
Yeah. Well, there are two things. First of all, you know, one of the reasons for the increase in life expectancy is the huge decrease in infant and child mortality. So, you know, if you look at, say, Arthur Guinness. He had 13 children, died at the age of 76 or something. So, you know, in the old days, childhood, infancy was completely dangerous, and childhood was dangerous, and childbearing was dangerous. But once you got around those risks, the people didn't live much shorter than today. It's just so many of them died before they reached adulthood. So that is kind of paradoxical, because it is quite true what you say, in that, you know, there is a degradation, and this is what Robert Kennedy, you know, one of his major, and I think actually the appointment of Robert Kennedy could turn out to be historically the most important aspect of this presidency.
Yes.
That's my personal feeling. But Robert Kennedy, he's been talking about this for years, and what we are seeing is a kind of there are three things, you know. So you have big agriculture, then you have big food, and big pharma. So a lot of most of the agricultural production now is forced agriculture, and if you look at for example, wheat, or, you know, anything that's grown, then the amount of minerals and nutrients is actually less, because these are just plants that are just being forced. So they don't actually have the roots of the ground. There's aquaculture, or vertical farming, all this stuff, right? And then you have Robert Kennedy was talking about this recently. One guy in America, he started to force farm pigs the same way as they do with chickens and eggs, and he was able to push the price down by about 90%. And this forced all the other farmers to do the same thing, because otherwise they would have gone out of business. But of course, the quality of the product is terrible. And you can only keep animals under those circumstances. You're going to fill them up with hormones and chemicals and so on. So you have, so the food production, the food is degraded, and it's toxic. And then it's processed by big agriculture. So you get this processed product, which is intensely rich in calories but poor in nutrients, right? And this is what makes people so obese. And then when they get sick, and it doesn't just make them obese, it also makes them more prone to cancer, to depression, to all of this, right? So it has a lot of things. And then you pass them on to big pharma, which is treating. And, you know, it's interesting that, for example, Bayer, the company Bayer, owns Monsanto and pharmaceutical industry. So the kind of the circle is closed now. So you have big pharma, which is also working part of big agriculture, and it's a kind of a vicious circle. And the human being has been moved around this circle. And what we're seeing, what I observe, and I observe it also in the financial system, where there's an idea that the human is a kind of a product, and the idea is to extract the maximal amount of value out of this product. So you, let's say you save, you start to work, and then you save and you buy a house, and then when you retire, you go into a retirement home because you've no kids to look after you. So you're in the retirement home, so you have to sell the house. And the perfect solution is you drop dead the minute the last cent out of your house is taken, right? Yeah. And in some respects, you have this kind of extractive, it's a kind of this extractive idea. You know, what they're doing with example, lithium mining, all of this is kind of an extractive idea. And the idea is to extract all of the use out of an individual.
Yes.
And so at the end, you know, there's a kind of a husk, and that's it then. You've extracted all the use out of that individual. And you know, education, for example, the function of education is not to unleash the potential of an individual, but to do the exact opposite, to produce a person who's going to be a part of this particular cog in this particular machine.
Yes.
But at the same time that this is happening, of course, you know, with COVID, they pushed it, and they exposed their hand. So I think in some respects, COVID was a gift to us, really, because as opposed to climate, as opposed to gender, with COVID, we know the beginning as a discrete beginning, the middle, and the end. And we know what happened. We know now it was a lie. This is not, you know, it's not the climate is going to heat up in 20 years. We know this. This is a fact. We know the vaccine was a setup. we know,
but,
yeah.
But yes, but we know, Paul, but the generality of people still don't know because of the corruption of the media. Isn't that right? I mean, like the
That's
media
true.
are telling them lies every day.
Yeah, but it is known. It is known. Whereas the other, with climate, there's an element of speculation to it. I mean, I'm pretty sure, climate changes the whole time and so on. But with this, it is known and the evidence is there. It is documented now. It cannot be taken out of the world. You can deny it all you like, but it is there now. It's like a stone in your shoe, as the mafia used to say. You can't.
Okay, Paul. Well, now that brings me to where I was going to go at the very beginning.
Yeah.
A very interesting journey. But the man behind you there and the way that he's now shaping up. And I mean, I've gone out on a limb on this myself. No, and I'm quite happy to have done so, because I think that in a certain sense, what you say is true. And Trump, because of that, for all kinds of complicated reasons and, involuted reasons, is the best hope we have. He's the best show, the only show in town, as it were. Now, but if I look at the last couple of weeks since he was inaugurated, there's a lot of good stuff for sure. Stuff on the woke issues, the trans business and that the WHO business, the coming out of the WHO, although it's going to take a year, I gather, to implement that. The USAID, as you say, today and in the last two. We're talking that I think on 3rd of February at this stage. So, now that, but then on the debit side, there's this extraordinary thing that happened only, I think, on the second day of his presidency, which was the introduction of this, where he spoke alongside this new consortium, which is introducing, of all things, MRNA,
Stargate.
Yeah. Oracle is one of the, and there's
Yeah.
very luminaries, and there's been all kinds of talk. And very interestingly, Elon Musk seems to have gone out on a limb against this project and against the personnel in particular whom he knows and has had previous involvement with commercially or business-wise. Now, I just wonder, like mRNA, I mean, precisely this question is at the heart of what we're talking about in the post-COVID kind of discussion and meltdown. That this device is basically, as far as we can see, and the circumstantial evidence is overwhelming, it has killed innumerable people in the world, in our countries, in Ireland, perhaps over 20,000 people. Now, if you had said, if you could have said in March 2020 that with certainty that 20,000 extra people would die as a result of COVID, you'd almost be inclined to say, well, okay, go ahead with your lockdowns, go ahead with all whatever, because we can't have that. That didn't happen in relation to COVID, although they keep trying to tweak the figures and steal from all over the place to make it look like it did. But here we have clear evidence that there's been a massive spike from 2021 onwards. Yeah. And in the world, I mean, according to the figures being put about by Ed Dowd, who's been he used to work with BlackRock, and then he kind of went honest, and he's done a tremendous work on the stats of that and putting together the various, and he's saying that something between 7 million and I think 17 million people died worldwide from the vaccines. So mRNA. So that seems to be, and I mean, the issue there with mRNA, I mean, you'd be better at articulating, but my understanding is, I mean, that what it does, it causes the body to attack itself. Is that a correct explanation?
Yes. Well, Ed Dowd, Dennis Rancourt says 17 million, and Ed Dowd says 11, and the lower bound is about 7. So we're talking about somewhere between 7 and 17 million people by reasonable estimate who would not otherwise have died. And the question is, it's a moot point. For example, in Germany, where they have good statistics, there was no excess mortality in 2020. Nobody, and so essentially nothing happened.
Yes.
We have to, all of these measures. There's a tendency to kind of get into the weeds about masks and all this. No, nothing happened. We have to remember that nothing happened. If we hadn't tested for it,
just to get on that one, Paul, you see what they immediately come back to. Yes, well, that's because we had lockdowns and masks.
Yeah, but that's a load of rubbish.
Yes,
I mean, I was actually surprised there wasn't excess mortality because of the lockdowns, because none of these lockdowns I mean, you could get into it, but the lockdowns were imposed after there weren't that many infections. I mean, take it from me, there was nothing happened. It was a normal seasonal flu of medium intensity, less than we have in most years. In fact, that's all that happened. Now I saw that press conference, and Larry Ellison, who's the head of Oracle, he gave a talk afterwards, and he was talking about he was mixing up. It was obvious he didn't completely understand what he was talking about. But what he was saying was, there is a means now to diagnose tumors, cancers, through what's called a liquid biopsy. So when you have cancer in your body, bits of this cancer go into the bloodstream, and you can detect these in the bloodstream, and it can help you to detect if you have cancer or not. But this is only in its infancy. Otherwise, I'd be doing the test. And it doesn't tell you as much as he thinks it tells you. And then the idea is Sam Altman was there from OpenAI. So Sam Altman, the idea was Altman would get the OpenAI to look at these liquid biopsies, and then they'd be able to tell you what tumor you have, and then you'd get the mRNA as a vaccine against the tumor. This is completely mad stuff, right? There's no this. You're talking about 25 years of research even to start something like that, right? And what we found, I don't call it mRNA, I call it mod RNA, modified RNA, because it's not actually RNA. And the Nobel Prize that Drew Weissman and Carrico, Dr. Carrico got for this mRNA technology, what they actually did is, in the RNA, there's like 4 Lego blocks, different Lego blocks that make up the RNA, and they changed one, let's say yellow, green, blue, and red, and they changed the red block for a gray block. Now in the mRNA in your body, this gray block is sometimes used, but only in very special circumstances. You can't change something that fundamental and think it's going to be the same. So you have all of these weird effects that were not predictable. And all of these, so it's a technology. It's been worked on for about 30 years. It came out of cancer research, and there might actually be some aim or some justification for using mRNA technology, not as a vaccine for cancer, but as a treatment for cancer. So if let's say you have a final stage, say brain tumor, and it's inoperable, or it's been operated and it's come back, and you have no other options, or the same with the lung cancer. If you have no other options, well, then I think there probably is a case for testing mRNA technology in that context as a last resort. And this is what it was used for. And it never, but even this is what it had been tested for. And even in that context, it never left the laboratory because it was so toxic. I mean, we have to remember this. So a technology which was too toxic for final stage cancer was used. I think about 2 billion people got this in the end in the world.
Yes.
And the idea, I want to give Donald Trump the benefit of the doubt. I think if you listen to his speeches before the election, he said, we never got the credit we deserved for Operation Warp Speed, and I saved the pandemic, and I never got any credit for it, and we did our best, and so on. And I think he doesn't understand what's going on, and he doesn't understand the technology. That's the charitable.
Well, yeah, this is the thing, that there was this connection between mRNA, cancer, blah blah, and the warp speed thing. That's the thing that jumped into people's minds, and understandably. Now, on the credit side again, and that's, Trump is focusing on mandates. He's focusing on dissolving mandates. Now, that's an encouraging sign if he can enforce that, if he can deliver that. But the problem is still that he hasn't. You see, it seems to me that the problem with the warp speed thing is not the operation itself, because at the time it was all a bit ambiguous as to, would the vaccine be available? Would it be any use? Nobody knew, really. There was some trepidation that at that short notice of preparation, you weren't going to get a proper vaccine anyway. And that was even early on in 2020, there was talk, and there was that point was being made. I remember it. But it's interesting, he pointed Jay Bhattacharya, who was one of the first people out of the traps in relation to the mandate and the general lockdown thing, and challenging that from the very, very get-go, really. And then, as I say, lifting the mandates on the military and so on. But still, he will not recant of the mRNA. He will not concede the arguments that are out there now, and people like Ed Dowd making them. And he must be, President Trump must be aware of the existence of Ed Dowd and what he's done, what he's doing.
Well, he had Scott Adams on his team for a while. Is that his name?
Yeah.
He had people on his team for a while who were critical of it. I think I think there are two things. I think, first of all, he's somebody who has difficulty maybe admitting mistakes. I can imagine that. And I think he might see it in the same sense as going to Mars. He sees it, cure of cancer. Every president wants to cure cancer, beat cancer. And he could see it in that context. Yes. But having said that, it is a bit disturbing. But at the same time, what you were saying about the vaccines, I wrote my first piece that I wrote on COVID. I wrote it in July of 2020, and it was about the vaccines. And even then, it was clear to me that they weren't going to work in the sense. And I read that article a few weeks ago, and I'm shocked almost myself how prophetic it was. But it was because you tend to forget what you actually thought at that time. But
I'm the same. Yeah, it's very interesting because I wrote a couple of articles early on too about the way that the triaging of people in hospitals and so on, the way that was going to be abused. It looked like it. And it was really astonishing to read them back. But here's the thing now about Donald Trump that I'm struggling with.
Yeah.
Or wrestling with. I'm not struggling necessarily, but I'm wrestling with it. And it touches on a lot of the things you've been saying in different ways. On the one hand, you see, I'm constantly aware all the time that you can look at politics in a kind of an organic way, as we always did. And you can have very interesting discussions about geopolitics or Irish politics or German politics or European politics or American politics. And it's all very interesting. But then this other thought kind of rushes in from stage left, which is the other thing, the combine, the puppet masters, the panopticon, the combine, the people who are manipulating, as we feel they are. And then we look back at Donald Trump and we start to look at his behavior, his movements. Is he moving? Does he look like a puppet? Or does he look like a human being? It's kind of, I suppose, the rough and ready way of putting it. But the point being that, is he really his own man? Can he organically change America and as a consequence change the world back to something resembling its old self? Or is he really in the hands of these people? I'm asking for your opinion. I'm not asking you to know the answer.
Yeah.
I don't think I can answer this definitively.
No, well, the guy of the panopticon actually was Jeremy Bentham. The name just came back to me now. Jeremy Bentham, English philosopher, 18th century. No, but no, I think with Trump, first of all, Trump is as much a product of the movement as he is a generator of the movement, and Trump would not have been possible without a change in groundswell opinion.
Yes,
that's the first point. The second point you have to make is, we can't compare Trump against perfection. We have to compare him against the alternative. And I think there's absolutely no doubt that if Trump, we have to just think, and it wasn't by any means, everybody says now, oh, it was a done thing and so on. It wasn't that clear that he was going to win.
Not even on the night of the count.
No, it wasn't. And everybody's clever after the event. But I was asked for my opinion, and I said what I thought was there was about a 25%, about a 50% chance that he would win by a small margin, and about a 25% chance that he would win clearly, and about a 25% chance that Kamala Harris would win by a small margin, and 0 chance that she would win clearly. Right. And that wasn't actually too bad of a prediction. But
Yes.
it wasn't. So you know, we have to. So it wasn't outside the bounds of possibility that Kamala Harris would have won. Now let's imagine let's just think about that. What would have happened? Absolutely, you know, none of this would have happened. It would have gone completely in the opposite direction, because they would have said, Jesus, after that, we're not going to, you know, we have to put a stop to this carry on. We cannot let this happen again. And all of the things you were talking about, you know, digital, we have the Digital Services Act, we have all, these would have been implemented with a steel hand. They would have closed society down. I'm quite sure about that. And so you know, we have to say, well, we really dodged a bullet. And Elon Musk said this before the election. He said, you know, this is a pivotal moment. It's a fork in the road. This is what he said about the German election. It's a fork in the road. And it was a fork in the road. And thank God we lived to fight another day. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have to fight.
Well,
we live to fight another day. If he had not won, I am quite sure that it would been. I don't know how we would have got out from under this if he had not won the election.
I'm very much of that mind, Paul. But I also have this nagging thing that what if none of it is real? Because, you know, there is that whole school.
Yes. Yes.
That they're all actors. It's all made up. They're all the new monde is already written. There's nothing anybody can do. I think that's what they're saying. I'm not certain about that part, because some of them always say, well, if we stop now, if we just stop believing in Trump, we might have a chance to turn this around. But nobody has any proposal as to what we would be doing at that moment in order to do this. However, like my sense, therefore, like, you see, my faith in Trump comes from, you know, a mixture of watching his personality, but also I would say of what you might almost call, well, you would call them supernatural factors.
Yeah.
That first of all, Trump is not the kind of guy that will stab his people in the back. I don't believe so. So whatever happens, he will, if it's bad, he will be the victim in some way of something. He will be assassinated, or he will be placed into a situation where he cannot move as he was the last time, to some extent, in a different way. But the other thing is, I believe, as you say, that you know, the world, you know, it bends towards goodness, and we've had enough of darkness for the last few years. I feel that there's some light coming now in the last few weeks. I'm very buoyed up actually by your description of the mRNA cancer business, because it takes a lot of the sting out of it, and it explains it in a very clear way that wasn't obvious to, and I heard nobody else explain it at the time, and it really creates a different color on that whole episode, which happened immediately after his election. Now, on the other hand, or after his inauguration, you know, you mentioned Elon Musk. But again, Elon Musk gets a lot of bad press. In fact, in some respects, he gets worse press from the skeptics than Donald Trump gets. You know, they really think he's a dark force and on a dark horse and so on. And I call him a hero on a zebra for precisely that reason, that he's an ambivalent or an ambiguous entity. You know, as a Clint Eastwood, he's not quite there. You know, like, you know, but at the same time, if I revert back to my organic apprehension of reality, I think he's a good guy.
Yes, he is. Yeah.
And so,
well, I think you know what, a lot of these people, there's a kind of you can kind of get an erotic thrill of doom. You know, there's a kind of an erotic thrill you get out of things being terrible, and you can kind of luxuriate in this feeling.
Yes, yes. There's the whole apocalyptic thing and the chastisement thing and all this. They love it, don't they? They just tell you, oh, you're in for a chastisement. Look at all the terrible things.
Yes, yeah. I said this to you. I call myself an apocalyptimist. So I believe in the apocalypse, but I'm optimistic about how it ends. You know, but they're not apocalyptimists. There is a kind of and I think as well, you know, there were people, let's say in our movement, who became prominent and have turned out to be right now, and they're finding it very hard to let go of this particular moment. And you know, the world is not perfect, and we're not comparing Trump to perfection, But you know, as I said, we're living to fight another day. It doesn't mean we have to stop fighting. Of course, we have to continue fighting, but we live to fight another day. Otherwise, I don't know. I would have been, you know, I would have despaired. I don't know how we would have got out of it, at least for a generation, you know. And now we have this. So, for example, I did this video at the start of 2021. I told you about this with a man called Mark Friedrich, and it went viral in Germany. So it got like 1.2 million clicks in about 3 days. And then YouTube took it down. About a week ago, that suddenly reappeared. And not only has it reappeared, it's been monetized. So Mark is starting to earn money off it. I don't know, is he going to get that like for the million clicks, the money? He might give me a few bob if he gets that repay. But so these are things that we didn't reapply to have that reinstated, just reappeared. So you know, things are certainly, you know, there are a lot of positive signs. And I mean, I'm fundamentally you know, I'm a Christian believer, and I believe in the goodness of people and so on. So I'm not, and I think it's wrong actually to despair like that, you know.
No, and I think also, Paul, that I mean that there is a kind of an automatic reflex that has kind of been built into us in the course of the last 5 years, where we have so used to terrible news, yes, awful things, that we don't trust anything.
Yes.
And it's a very, very kind of vivifying thing to actually get from you permission, as it were. And this is not a facetious point at all. I'm totally sincere about it. Like that, your optimism, your faith in this, your hope about this, can actually help each of us, because, you know, we just need to remove that block of skepticism,
yes,
and go back to that organic way of looking at reality and say, you know, 20 years ago, if this kind of thing had been going on, what would my disposition have been? Well, I've been saying, well, I listened to Elon Musk, and yeah, he's saying things that buoy me up. So I'm going to be buoyed up today. I'm not going to, you know, take on the despair of 6 months' time today when there's no reason to. And I think that in itself will have a cumulative effect in our movement and in the world, if we actually go down that road. But
well, there is the phrase trust and verify. You know, trust. The Americans say trust and verify. But I mean, the first part is trust. It doesn't mean you don't have to verify, but you have to, you know, and you know, fundamentally, I think the world fundamentally is in a much better place or much better position than it has ever been. You know, yeah, you have to up till about 1830. The life expectancy of people was 35, and it had been like that for all of history.
Yes,
for all of history. You know,
Paul, I think we're going to run out of time very shortly, but on our stream, whatever. But I just want to talk one other subject before we go, because I know that you're going next week, I think it is, to the second ARC conference.
Yes.
I was at the first one with you, and we had a very nice time and a very interesting time, and we argued with the establishment and lost. I think we fought the law, and the law.
Yeah.
But you're going back. I actually would have liked to go back, but circumstances didn't permit it. It's not that I'm in any way protesting about Dr. Peterson or anything like that. I do have still a lot of time for him. I've recently purchased his book. It's somewhere around here, which I've left it in a conspicuous place so that I will read it when it, you know, as soon as possible. But it's called, I think, We Who Wrestle with God, which sounds a very interesting book, and I'm very interested in his whole thinking about that. But you're going to the ARC. It's next week, is it?
Yes.
Oh, by the time this goes out, it'll be starting. I think.
Yeah. Mm.
So, what are your hopes for that? Or I mean, what's your own feeling about ARC and Peterson and that thing at this point now?
Yeah, well, I mean, this time there are 4,000 participants, which is nearly 4 times as big as the last time. So wow. We'll have to wait and see how if it works in that format. You know, well, my position on ARC is the same as with Donald Trump or with Elon Musk. You know, fundamentally, it's going in the right direction. For me, it was a little bit too transatlantic, a little bit too, let's say, unreservedly pro-American. It was very Anglo-centric, and I thought they didn't do nearly enough to talk about COVID. We spoke about that.
Yes.
That was probably the major criticism I would have had. But at the same time, you know, it's going in the other things in terms of restoring the family, energy, economics, and so on. There were so many good things that I'm prepared to, you know, give them the benefit of the doubt on the other things. And you know, I think if we're working with people, and let's say we have 60% overlap, well, that's not bad actually, and you can work with that. And you know, none of us are perfect. I don't know everything. My views are not, you know, for the whole world. Some of them are probably wrong. In fact, certain some of them are wrong. That's the same for everybody. And so I think you know, after a period where we have been so in every area of life going in the completely wrong direction, the money system, for example, the energy system, the environmental hoax, which it is, the COVID hoax, right? And now you have a movement, the disempowerment of men, the disempowerment of women as well at the same, you know, all of this stuff. And now we have a movement which is going in many respects, in many areas, in the right direction. And some maybe they're not going exactly the way we want, but you have to accept that. And so,
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, well, I think you should, and I'm actually quite sorry now.
Yeah, I was a bit disappointed because we were sitting down like the two lads in the Muppets down the back table.
It was most enjoyable at that level. But you know, you see, it's very interesting what you're saying there, because a thought just came to me, and it's kind of been formulating for a while, which is that where did I feel before the kind of feelings I'm getting in response to people on our side now, who everything that happens that seems to be remotely positive, and they kind of listen to your enthusiasm for about like 45 seconds. You're not serious. You're not serious that you believe in Jordan Peterson, Donald Trump, Elon Musk, blah, 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 whatever. Really kind of, yeah, well, it's kind of, oh, come on, John, you're an intelligent guy, you know, what are you talking about? You know, and you know what it reminds me of, Paul? It reminds me of when we were teenagers, you know, and you'd be going to hops and things like that. And you'd be kind of sizing up some girl and someone, you know, and you're surrounded by your friends. And you might actually just say, well, I'm interested. And of course, they all say, oh, no, she's a prick teaser. Don't, no. He's a man eater, you know. Yeah. And but the point was, they were all going to stand there watching the dancing all night long.
Oh, yeah, because they didn't have the nerve.
And you wanted to go out.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah. Oh, well, it's the same thing. And, you know, I think, you know, what we have learned in COVID is that our institutions are completely corrupt and need to be rebuilt. I think most of the institutions need to be, you know, I think they need to be completely destroyed and rebuilt from scratch. That probably won't happen. We know that, but people are the same. And, you know, we can see in America now, the way, how quickly, once the culture changes, and once you get, you know, Steve Bannon, in the first campaign, Steve Bannon said, he said, Trump is an agent of change. He said, and I thought that was he's the agent of change. And he said, he's a historical character. He's the agent of change. And so what is happening, once you get, you know, it boils, and then you get a tipping point, and you need an individual or an event to channel that energy. And he is this agent of change. And now you can see it, they're tumbling like bowling pins, because most of these institutions, they're like a house that's out of wood and has been completely eaten out by termites, and the whole structure is there, but all it needs, you know, and the whole house will collapse. And I think most of our institutions are in that state, and because the people who are working them lack all conviction. It's, you know, like the Yeats poem, they lack all conviction. So
yes, I think that's right. Yeah, but on the other hand as well, Paul, I mean, America is a basket case, right? I mean, financially, in debt terms, like it's, I think it's the fourth generation of, you know, stealing from the future. when you look at the madness of the Black Lives Matter and FIFA and all this woke stuff and everything, and the insanity of the DEI programs everywhere. And I mean, it come up again recently in relation to that recent terrible plane crash and so on, whether right or wrong. All this is so true. And I mean, America, if Trump succeeds in cleaning out and Musk, I mean, there's going to be a tremendous backlash, which could very easily spill over into violent public order, as we saw in 2020. So, he does have a massive challenge on his hands to do this. It's not going to be an easy task to get America back into shape, because I think it's a project probably for decades rather than just years.
Oh, I think probably for a generation. But I mean, I at the same time, everything that man has done, man can undo. None of this is written into stone. There's a scene in Lawrence of Arabia where they're attacking the fort through the desert, Aqaba. They're going through the desert, and so Lawrence, they say, this can't be done, the fate and so on, and I think as Lawrence says, nothing is written, everything we can change it, everything can be changed. Yes. So there's no our destiny is open, and the destiny of the human race is open, and I because the fundamentals, so even if the money system completely collapsed, let's say the money system in America completely collapsed and the dollar went to zero in value, all the roads, all the factories, all of this, everything is still there. The people are still there. The food still will come out of the soil if you plant a seed. All of this will still go on. The water will still come out of the taps, right? Mm. So there is a way. There's a way of these things are not beyond our. We have created the problem. Humans have created the problem. But we can also solve the problems, or at least partially solve them, because it's always just a part. But fundamentally, the infrastructure and so on, everything is still there. It's just that maybe the money, but maybe that needs to happen. And there's a book came out in America called The Fourth Turning about 25 years ago, and they describe history in cyclical terms. It's a bit spring, summer, autumn, winter, and each season is maybe a generation long, 20 to 25 years. And so if you, and they analyze the history of the United States in those terms, and it's quite plausible. Sometimes they bend things to fit, but I think it's probably not bad as a kind of a meta-narrative. And in that sense, we're now in the fourth turning. If we say the fourth turning began 2008 with the financial crisis, so we're in this now, it's about 25 years. So we've about another 5 or 6 years to go. Now, a lot of these fourth turnings in history, they always end in upheaval, but sometimes they end in open war and so on. But there's going to be, there's no way, I don't think there's any way we can get out of this without some upheaval. No. The question is how bad does it get? But at the end, you have a period of regrowth and reinvigoration of society and so on. And I think we're actually in the next, let's say, in our lifetimes, probably, we're going to see this happen. And then we're going to have a flowering and so on. And it will start, the cycle starts again. And I don't think we're at the end of the world. So I am fundamentally optimistic. And what I try to focus my mind on is what do we want the new world to look like? Because the old world is finished. The money system is finished. The institutions are finished. They're depleted. The church is finished.
Yes.
It's beyond reform.
Yes.
All of these institutions, the justice system is beyond reform. The media is beyond reform.
And one kind of final question, Paul, because we're about to run out, but do you think the people are there to man the new systems?
Yes.
Do you meet those people?
Yes, I do, and I think it's always been the case that the number of people, I for example, the Marxists say, there's history, there's scientific materialism, it's governed by these unseen forces. So I don't think that's true. I think history is done by people, and I think historical events are created by individuals in key positions, and Trump is an agent of change. So I think if the population of the world is 8 billion. So in statistical terms, there've only been about 30 billion people ever, right? And a quarter of about a quarter of them are alive right now this minute. So purely in statistical terms, there's a Beethoven running around somewhere. There's an Albert Einstein somewhere. There's a Mozart, just in purely statistical terms, you know, because there are so many of us. So these people have always been few in number, but
yes,
because there are so many of, you know, at the time you know, when Christ was on the earth, there were maybe, what were there, maybe 50 million people in the whole world. I don't exactly know the number, but there are 8 billion of us now. So you know, it's a question of how we deal with it, and of course anything can go wrong, and we can have a third world war and whatever. But if we don't have that,
well, I think, Paul, thank you so much. I think really it's a very positive message, and not gratuitously positive. I mean, it's reasoned, and you know, I think in many respects that's important, not least because actually that positivity can be contagious, you know. And I think that rather than have a contagion of negativity, I would prefer to have one of positivity. So thank you very much for what you've been saying, Paul. Thank you for coming on. We hope to have you on again soon. Can you do? Is there any place that people, if you want people to contact you, that they can contact you, or are you?
Oh, I don't. They'd have to contact you, and then you can contact me. I don't have a.
Right. Yeah, they can make contact with me via my Substack, and I'll pass on any messages to Paul.
Yeah, sure.
Well, we look forward to having you on again, Paul, and let's hope the next meeting will be just as positive or more so.
Okay. Thanks very much, John.
Thank you, Paul.